Now, on Inside California Politics, a new poll shows growing opposition to the recall of Governor Newsom.
Newsom's position has strengthened a bit.
But those behind the recall effort say the governor's seat isn't safe.
It's not your grandma's election. This is what I would refer to as a jungle general.
Plus, gubernatorial candidate Kevin Faulconer calls himself a common sense candidate, how he plans to win Governor Newsom's seat in the pending recall election.
Broadcasting across the Golden State, this is Inside California Politics.
Thanks for joining us for Inside California Politics. I'm Frank Buckley in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nikki Lorenzo in Sacramento. It has been a busy week for Governor Newsom. On Monday, he previewed his $100 billion California comeback plan, which includes nearly $12 billion in direct payments to 2/3 of Californians. On Tuesday, he announced the second part of his plan, a $12 billion package to tackle homelessness. Let's go to Wednesday, where Newsom revealed another component of the plan, an additional $20 billion in investments for improvements in public schools. Thursday, the governor announced the largest small business relief program in the nation, including a total of $4 billion in grants. And on Friday, Governor Newsom detailed the entire plan to the state legislature, along with his final budget proposal.
As Governor Newsom unveils his $100 billion California comeback plan, a new survey shows growing opposition to the recall effort. Senior advisor and director of the governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, Dee Myers, joins us now. Dee, let's start with the recall. The new poll from UC Berkeley's Institute of Governmental Studies has mixed news for Governor Newsom. One thing that jumped out at me when Democrats are asked whether they want other prominent Democrats on the replacement election ballot to provide another way for a Democrat to remain governor if Governor Newsom is removed from office. 48% of Democrats favor that idea, 29% oppose, 23% are undecided. Are those Democrats who want a Democrat on the ballot making a mistake?
Look, it's up to Democrats. If another Democrat wants to get into the race, they're certainly not prohibited from doing that. The fact is that most of the Democratic leaders, the vast majority of Democratic leaders in this state overwhelmingly support Governor Newsom, and I think they support his agenda. They support the budget that he just rolled out, which provides incredible new supports for individuals and small businesses as we recover from this pandemic. It invests in education and invests in the long-term health of the economy. It invests in housing and doing something about homelessness. And he just is broadly supported by Democrats. So we're excited about that. We're excited about what this budget allows us to do to create a better future for all Californians, and very confident that Californians will support this going forward.
This week, the governor announced a stunning $76 billion budget surplus and a plan to send hundreds of dollars back to millions of Californians in the form of what he called a tax rebate. Critics are calling it, though, Governor Newsom's recall refund. Is it a coincidence that those checks could potentially arrive shortly before voters are set to cast their ballots on the recall question?
You know, what's driving the timing of this is state law and the governor's job, right? The revised budget, which the governor has been rolling out all week, is legally required by the middle of May, by May 15th. And so he rolled out that revised budget. As you noted, the state has a $76 billion surplus, as opposed to what we thought was going to be a $54 billion shortfall at the beginning, just 1 year ago at the beginning of this year, as the pandemic created so much uncertainty and so much economic hardship. But because of good stewardship on behalf of the governor and the state, and because tax revenues from our business community were much stronger than expected, we have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Also in the budget on Tuesday, Governor Newsom proposed $12 billion in new funding to get more people experiencing homelessness in the state into housing and to, quote, functionally end family homelessness within 5 years. Was that a response to this week's poll and others in the past that show a majority of voters, 57% in this poll, believe the governor is doing a poor or very poor job when it comes to the homeless in California?
Well, homelessness in California has been a big problem for a very, very long time, for decades, going back to changes in policy that ended up with a lot of people on the street. We need to do a better job of addressing it. It's certainly not something that we came up with overnight in response to a poll. It's something the governor's been working on As you know, last year he gave his State of the State address 100% about housing and homelessness. And then his plans to address that a year or more ago were interrupted by the pandemic. And certainly the pandemic has exacerbated many of the problems that we know we face in California. But during the pandemic, the governor created sort of two national model programs, Project Home Key and Project Room Key, which provided transitional housing to get homeless people off the streets, to first of all, to move them and their communities out of the path of the coronavirus, but then to transition them into permanent, longer-term housing with the kinds of services that will help them be successful, from mental health to job placement to skills development. So those projects are now being scaled. That's a big part of what's in the governor's budget, and we will try to make a dent in homelessness. And as you noted, the governor committed to ending family homelessness within 5 years. So it's a lot, but the governor's very committed to it.
Dee Dee Myers, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And this week, Inside California Politics contributor Catherine Heenan spoke one-on-one with Republican gubernatorial candidate Kevin Faulconer. Faulconer described himself as a straight shooter and came out strong against Governor Newsom's efforts to end the housing crisis.
I'll tell you, I did not allow tent encampments on the sidewalk in San Diego or under our freeway underpasses or overpasses or in our canyons. Why? Because it's unsafe, unclean, and unsanitary. If you allow tent encampments on your sidewalk, you're condemning people to die on your sidewalk. We're better than that as Californians. We've set up a series of shelter systems in San Diego that got people the help, the support that they need to get back on track. We have to do that. We cannot allow what we've seen in too many great cities in our state, tent encampments continuing to grow, to literally double. I'm going to take a much different track on that because we have to, because we care about people. We care about them enough to get them off the streets, out of an unsafe, unclean, unsanitary environment and into a shelter where they can get back on their feet and then ultimately get the help and the support to get that place of their own.
On some issues, Mayor, you are quite progressive, some social issues. Are you afraid of offending the conservative base of the Republican Party?
Oh, I'm a straight shooter, I will tell you. That's what I've been known for as mayor of San Diego. Look, a Republican who got elected in a very deep blue city and got elected twice. Why? Because I like to think it's not about Republican or Democrat. What's the right thing that we should be doing? And when you focus on common sense, I think that's how you make the changes and the reforms that most people want and expect. I'm a big believer that if you go out and win the argument publicly, then you can win the vote. As I said, as a Republican mayor in a majority Democrat city, all the positive changes that we made in San Diego is because we brought people together. It's not about liberal or conservative. It's about common sense.
We were talking earlier about a recent poll. It seems to indicate people might be less keen about recalling Governor Newsom. Is that a concern?
I think there's strong support for the recall. Not only the 2 million Californians that signed the petition, but the fact that it's Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Everybody who wants a change at the top of California, and I think rightfully so.
One tax question, California, obviously a high tax state, not for corporations though, and that rate has remained fairly flat for years. Is that something of concern? Is that something you might address?
Yeah, we should not be raising taxes on California companies and jobs. We can't afford to do that. And companies and individuals are leaving our state. We have to make California more affordable because if we continue on the path we are, it's going to be unsustainable. And that's a big part of why we're reducing taxes on the middle class. We have to make it more affordable to live and work in California.
Coming up, inside the latest polling numbers from UC Berkeley suggesting only 40% of Californians would vote to recall Governor Newsom. We'll speak with poll director Mark DiCamillo next. UC Berkeley's Institute of Governmental Studies released a new poll this week showing growing opposition to the Newsom recall. Poll director Mark DiCamillo joins us now. Mark, great to have you here on Inside California Politics. Of course, UC Berkeley releasing a new poll this week, co-sponsored by the LA Times, talking about not only the overall response right now among voters with the recall, but the candidates. What stuck out to you among the polling data that you received?
Well, first, Newsom still looks comfortably in a comfortable zone. Just 36% of the voters in our survey said they were on board to recall the governor. 49% were saying they would vote no. That was up 4 points from our poll in January. So Newsom's position has strengthened a bit. But what the poll did go into were the other side of the ballot. We looked at the 4 Republican candidates these are the prominent Republicans who have announced their candidacies, and there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of support for any of them. In particular, there's been a lot of media attention to Caitlyn Jenner. She did the poorest by far. Just 6% of voters statewide said they would be inclined to support her candidacy, while 77% said they would not. Even within the Republican Party, just 13% of Republicans said they would back her candidacy. So that was certainly a top-line finding. None of the other Republicans in the race did all that well. The best were Kevin Faulconer, the former San Diego mayor, and John Cox, the former gubernatorial candidate. Both of them got 22% of voters saying they'd be inclined to support for their candidacy. So they both have a long way to go, but they're in a better position, certainly, than Jenner. Just by way of comparison, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was running in the recall election in 2003, the initial poll that we did when I was at the field poll, he got 31% saying that they would be inclined to vote for him. So none of the Republicans are up to that level. Perhaps Schwarzenegger had a stronger position because he was so well known. But even so, at this point, I think Newsom probably benefits from the lackluster showing of the Republicans.
I want to ask you about the argument from some Democrats to have a prominent Republican waiting in the wings, so to speak, just in case, Newsom were to falter and his favorables were to drop. How did voters in terms of this poll feel about that?
Well, for a Democrat, that we actually asked the registered Democrats that we polled that very question. Would you favor having another prominent Democrat on the replacement side of the ballot or not? And by a 49% to 29% margin, voters thought that would be a good idea. And so they're basically going against the state party recommendation and, the preferences of Governor Newsom himself and his campaign. They think that might undercut his campaign, and they want to show solidarity. But I think voters are just being a little bit prudent here. Anything can happen in an election, and the Democrats anyways, want to ensure that another Democrat stays as governor if the worst should happen to Newsom.
The recall effort, looking at this polling data, and they're picking parts of it that say that this poll actually makes the case for them. Was there any specific data or information that you got from this polling that shows that this could, possibly exploit some weakness in the Newsom campaign?
Well, when you look at the results across regions of the state, I find it very interesting. The state is divided into very strongly Democratic regions and then not so strongly. Newsom's, the opposition to Newsom's recall is greater than 2-1 in the LA County area and also in the 9-county Bay Area. And that's really what he's relying on to defeat the recall. But he's actually losing. There are more yes voters than no voters in the Central Valley, in the Inland Empire, and in the kind of sparsely populated areas of the North Coast and Sierra. So there are parts of California that are favoring the recall. The other thing that's striking is that Democratic voters and no party preference voters really aren't that showing much interest in the recall, certainly not as much as Republicans at this stage. And what that says is Newsom will have to arouse their interest to get them to vote. Turnout's going to be a big factor. Republicans at this stage, I think, probably have a better chance of turning out the vote than the governor.
Mark DiCamillo, Director of UC Berkeley Institute of Governmental Studies. We appreciate your time here on Inside California Politics, helping us break down the polling data that you guys released this week. We appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
And coming up, more reaction to that latest poll from UC Berkeley. Anne Dunsmore with Rescue California joins us next. Why she says this new data is bad news for Governor Newsom. That new polling from UC Berkeley's Institute of Governmental Studies suggests less than 40% of Californians would vote to recall Governor Newsom. Campaign manager of Rescue California, Anne Dunsmore, joins us now with her take on the survey. And great to have you back on Inside California Politics. I want to talk about some polling this week that came out from UC Berkeley that says only 36% of registered voters said they would vote to recall Governor Newsom. Does this polling concern you, and do you think it's accurate?
You know, there's some underlying numbers in there that are actually, I totally 100% agree with, that are incredibly indicative. That 36% is sort of not really well understood until you dig down a little bit. You know, I think the things that should be making the governor lose sleep at night about that poll is that his job approval is still just at 52%. Now, everybody knows that if you're an incumbent and you're below 60% on job approval, you've got a big, huge target on your back, which is exactly what he has on his. He's 3 points away from being in the 40s, and that's a death knell right there. I think the other interesting thing is that the Democrat interest in voting on the recall lags Republican interest by over 2 to 1. So and the other interesting thing is 48% of the Democrats said they wanted to see an alternative to Gavin Newsom. So when you dig below those preliminary head-to-heads, there's some very interesting stuff going on there. And that falls in line more with, like, for example, the poll that was done of parents of school-age children in LA County, who said 76% of them said their children had been substantially damaged by the flip-flopping on the COVID, the school reopening policies. So it's really the devil in the detail. And I think that that's interesting for many reasons. One, the governor fell way behind in his numbers because he wasn't paying attention to detail. He was really looking at political surface head-to-heads like the ones you're quoting. It's when you dig down and you see the unrest and the breakout amongst the voters. He's only got a mid-20s, like 25, 26, in that same poll, approval on his handling of homeless, crime, and cost of living. And these are the issues that were in place pre-COVID that started this movement in the first place.
Rescue California released its playbook, so to speak, online, talking about the strategy over the next couple of months, reaching out via Citizens Brigade to independent voters, Democrats, of course, Republicans, but also you mentioned two specific groups, Latino voters and also AAPI. Why?
Well, he's very weak with both groups. Frankly, they're actually very conservative leaning. They're very concerned about crime. They're very concerned about social issues. The Hispanic community in particular was disproportionately hurt by COVID. Their relief was not on par with other communities that were served. And then you have the crime problem. So I think he's been weak in Southern California. He's been weak in Los Angeles. He's been weak with these voting blocks. And we intend to take advantage of that. And because we think we know our message is much better suited to these groups of people.
Recall effort has not endorsed a candidate yet.
Nope.
But I will ask you this. Is the person who can convince voters to vote yes on the recall running right now?
I don't know, but I'm going to tell you something. My concern, first of all, Rescue California is a singularly formed committee. We're not allowed to endorse or advocate for any candidates. Our sole purpose is to get a yes vote in question number 1. And what that looks like is a 60 to 70% turnout of 20 million voters is going to be 6 to 7 million people. I need 50% plus 1 need to vote yes. Now, this is where the LA Times poll is very helpful because it basically shows that his base isn't interested in voting by half. Double the number of people are interested in voting for it. So what we feel is that Caitlyn Jenner could bring 1 to 2 million people to the table. John Cox can bring 1 to 3 million people to the table. Kevin Faulconer can bring 1 to 3 million people. Doug Osie's the only candidate running up in Northern California. He could just campaign up there and get 10, 15, 20% of the vote, and that might just win it. So it's not your grandma's election. This is what I would refer to as a jungle general. Everybody can run. We're used to just seeing two people. By the way, another interesting phenomenon is that most people think Gavin Newsom's on the ballot as a candidate, and that we need to get X number of votes to beat Gavin Newsom. No, 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 he's not on the ballot.
Anne Dunsmore with Rescue California. We appreciate your time here on Inside California Politics.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Coming up, an Inside California Politics interview is getting national attention and also makes its national comedy debut. We'll tell you which late night host is apparently watching your favorite politics program.
This week, Inside California Politics is making national headlines, and our Catherine Heenan's exclusive interview with gubernatorial candidate John Cox was featured on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah.
How close have you come to the bear?
I kissed the bear, actually. It's a very tame bear. It's been in hundreds of movies. It's a member of the Screen Actors Guild.
You kissed the bear? My man, it's a bear.
That clip aired here on Inside California Politics last weekend and has been viewed thousands of times online as well.
You can see more of our interviews online. Just head to your local station's website and click on Inside California Politics. Thanks for watching Inside California Politics.
We'll see you back here next weekend.